I want to talk to you today about using behavioural science to tackle complex real-world challenges and how to translate theory into practice. Much of what we read about behavioural science puts emphasis on the fact that a simple change to something, such as making use of a behavioural bias or reframing how we describe an outcome or changing the default option on a form, can result in positive changes to behaviour. But what if the behaviour we want to influence is inherently complex or is not due to a simple error of judgment? What do we do then? In this presentation, I'm going to take you through a detailed case study and effectively take you under the bonnet to see how the engine really works. But before I do that, I want to talk about the rapid rise in the use of behavioural science and why businesses have been enthusiastically taking it up. So let's talk about the rapid rise of this discipline. It will come as no surprise to you that there seems to be a massive growth in interest in behavioural science. When I went onto Google, I found that there were 49.2 million results for behavioural science theory and 53.5 million results for behavioural science in business. And along with this increase in interest, many books have been published, one of which is my own. Consequently, many organisations have sprung up to service the demand for behavioural science, both in the private and the public sectors. The latest directory from Action Design lists 424 organisations, of which just over half are private companies, 6 to 9 are academic units, and government bodies and NGOs each account for 51 entities. This is a dramatic increase. When I started the behavioural science team at Innovia in 2014, there were hardly any units that specialised in behavioural science, and few people knew what behavioural science was. This is the trajectory that I encountered. When I went to see companies in 2015, they would ask me, what is behavioural science? But by 2016, people were saying they'd heard of nudge and wondered if it was the same as behavioural science. By 2017, many people had read, but often had not actually finished, Kahneman's seminal work, Thinking Fast and Slow. And in 2018, I was starting to hear clients say that lots of companies were coming to sell behavioural sciences to them, so that by 2019 and up to the present day, some companies were setting up their own behavioural science capabilities. At this point, it's worth defining what we mean by nudging and behavioural science because, as we've seen, some clients were unsure of the difference. Technically, nudging uses biases and human irrationality to improve human decision-making. According to Hausman and Welch, nudges are ways of influencing choice without limiting the choice set or making alternatives appreciably more costly in terms of time, trouble, social sanctions, and so forth. They are called for because of flaws in individuals' decision-making, and they work by making use of those flaws. At Innovia, we define behavioural science a little more broadly. We emphasise that behavioural science has its roots in a number of different disciplines, specifically psychology, anthropology, sociology, and economics, and that fundamentally we apply the scientific method to human behaviour, using evidence and theories to understand what people actually do, not what they say they do. This is particularly relevant to commercial organisations because they spend large amounts of money on consumer and customer research and are often surprised that people do not behave according to the results of their surveys. Another point we emphasise is the use of theories and models of behaviour. There are literally dozens of theories of behaviour. The book The ABC of Behaviour Change Theories lists 83 of them, and there are many more that are not actually mentioned in it at all. Because behaviour is so complex and context dependent, there is no universal theory, and so these theories address different aspects of a given behaviour. But their usefulness lies in the fact that they represent hypotheses about what we think might be driving the behaviour, and more importantly, those hypotheses can be tested. So the key question is, can businesses apply theory to real-world challenges in timescales appropriate for the fast-paced commercial environment without taking shortcuts and losing the depth of understanding? The case study I'll take you through later will address this question, But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about why businesses are embracing behavioural science so enthusiastically. In this section, I will outline the key factors that have driven uptake of the discipline. All businesses have a vested interest in behaviour. In particular, they have an interest in behaviour change. This is because they want people to buy more of something, such as buy more shampoo. They sometimes want people to buy or use less of something, such as use less energy. They are concerned that people do something correctly, such as take their medicine at the right time of day. They may want people to do something differently, for example, use a smart home device that's new to them. And they may also want their employees to work in a different or better way. All these are behaviours they want to influence. But changing behaviour is hard. This is because the behavioural system is dynamic and interactive and depends on multiple influences, often acting simultaneously. Behaviour is context dependent, and motivations that influence behaviour are subconscious as well as conscious and can change from minute to minute. In order to change behaviour, we need to take all these factors into account. Furthermore, there's an intention behaviour gap. People say they will do things, but don't do them. Businesses spend large amounts of money on trying to change behaviours when they develop, design and promote new products and services. In fact, they spend millions on innovation, new product development, advertising, promotions and on market research every year. The challenge for businesses is that many traditional methods are poor at predicting consumer behaviour. Consumers cannot easily envision the future. As Henry Ford is quoted as saying, "If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses." Furthermore, traditional forms of market research, such as surveys and focus groups, are not always good at getting at the underlying social and emotional responses, and often suffer from desirability bias, where people give you the answer they think you want to hear rather than their true opinions. All this adds to the uncertainty that businesses face, and it is one of the main reasons that behavioural science can be useful, because the use of behavioural science overcomes many of these deficits and reduces uncertainty. How does it do this? It does it by applying the scientific method to humans. Good behavioural science follows the scientific method. This is where we define the problem, understand the behaviour in context, and develop hypotheses which we validate and test against the evidence base. Then we can design solutions and interventions to solve the problem and evaluate them in tests and experiments. Although at first glance this process seems lengthy to clients, ultimately it helps to solve the right problem faster, because with a deeper understanding of the consumer and the right data, they're more likely to direct their energy on solutions that will work and avoid missing out on a winning idea. This process provides them with greater confidence to invest because it is evidence-based and helps to reduce uncertainty inherent in innovation, new product development and marketing. Now I'm going to take you under the bonnet to see how the engine really works and show you a case study of a complex challenge. The challenge I want to talk about is Heineken's When You Drive Never Drink campaign. Now you may be wondering why Heineken, a manufacturer of alcohol, wants to prevent people from drinking. Heineken spend 10% of their marketing budget, which is considerable, on promoting responsible drinking. All alcohol manufacturers do this. It is part of their license to operate. But Heineken wanted to do something more than communicate about responsible drinking. They wanted to do something that could actually be effective. Hence they turned to the behavioural scientists at Innovia. Now remember, this is a really hard problem to solve. It has been with us since the car was invented. So what did we do? This is the process we followed, the scientific method as described earlier. First, we defined the target behaviour. Second, we diagnosed why the target behaviour was not happening. Third, we explored the full range of possibilities to influence the behaviour before we designed interventions that we could then implement and evaluate. I will take you through each of these in turn. Let's start with the target behaviour. In many cases, this can be the most difficult part of the process. What do you actually want people to do? Specificity is required to define the audience and the outcome, but Heineken had a very clear objective. They wanted to prevent people from drinking any alcohol before getting into a car. Specifically, they targeted people who were visiting bars and pubs. This was very clear, although not without its challenges, because in most countries there is a drink-drive limit and people are not actually prevented from drinking alcohol before driving. So we had identified a clear target behaviour, and now we had to diagnose what was causing it. To do this, we reviewed a vast amount of data, including data from Heineken and an enormous amount of academic literature on drink driving. This information was analysed using a model called the COM-B. This well-known model proposes that for any behaviour to occur, an individual must have the capability to perform it, the opportunity to perform it, and the motivation to perform it. Although this seems simple enough, there is a deeper level of analysis called the theoretical domains framework, which is a synthesis of 33 theories and 128 constructs taken from the academic literature. This allowed us to conduct a detailed analysis and map out a comprehensive list of the barriers and promoters to drinking and driving. These maps can be very detailed, and I will not go into detail here, but I will show you the main barriers we had to overcome. These are the main barriers that prevent people from not drinking any alcohol when driving. The key capability factor was poor knowledge about the effects of alcohol on driving performance. People did not know that drinking even small amounts of alcohol can have a significant impact on response times, and of course, this is a deep-seated habit that is hard to break. For opportunity, the issue is that people believe it is okay to drink a small amount in line with the law, but interpretation of a small amount can be very inaccurate indeed. Few people really know how big a unit of alcohol is or how many units they can have. Social influence is very important, and friends often put pressure on the driver to join them in a drink, and the driver joins in because he or she doesn't want to be perceived as a spoilsport. And added to this, it is hard to easily find non-alcoholic substitutes in the bar, as they are often hidden away and not visible. Finally, motivations are also important because people often believe that they are not affected by alcohol and do not expect to be stopped by the police. They may believe that because they are experienced drivers, they will be okay, and of course it is easy to give in to temptation once you are actually in the bar. With this behavioural diagnosis, we were able to focus on the critical factors to target the root causes of the behaviour. So we had a target outcome, we had identified what needed to change, and prioritised the key factors that influence behaviour. Now we needed to decide what types of behaviour change activities could be used to intervene to change behaviour. We considered the full range of ways to do this before developing specific interventions. The Behaviour Change Wheel, which is part of the COM-B suite of tools, identifies 9 categories of intervention as shown in the diagram. 3 were ruled out immediately. Restriction was not something that Heineken was in a position to enforce, nor could they coerce drivers by issuing penalties. Furthermore, they did not want to be seen to wag their finger at drivers by telling them that alcohol was bad for them. This left us with a range of possible categories, including restructuring the bar environment, modelling the right behaviours, incentivising drivers not to drink and drive, enabling people to stick to their goals, using persuasive messages, and training the bar staff to encourage drivers not to drink and drive. We now had a clear idea of the sort of interventions we needed to design. We generated literally dozens of ideas and tested them with people for acceptability and feasibility before we got to a shortlist. Then we prioritised them according to criteria we agreed with Heineken and where it had a clear behaviour change technique behind it. This led to 4 main ideas being selected for testing. First, we focused on substitution, making alcohol-free drinks easily visible. Enablement and social influence were important. We trained the bar staff to ask people if they were driving when they came to order a drink. If they said yes, The bartender would tell them if they stayed alcohol free, they would get a reward for themselves and for their friends. But to unlock the reward, they were asked to sign a pledge card. This was designed to encourage them to set a goal and stay committed to it. The programme was designed over a period of 2 months. It took lots of iterations following discussion with the target audience and bar staff in order to get the interventions right and to be something they actually wanted to deliver in their bars. But eventually we were ready to do a pilot proof of concept study. 10 bars were recruited in Manchester and Reading. They agreed to run the experiment during a 2-week period. The first week was the control period, where decoy interventions were put in the bar. The second week was the test week, where the interventions were put in place. In both weeks, interviewers were placed in the bars, some to observe and others to conduct exit interviews. The same questions were asked in both weeks. Pub goers were told that we were doing a survey to help improve the bar environment. Obviously, they were not asked directly whether they were drinking and driving. Rather, at some point during the interview, they were asked how they got to the pub, and later they were asked what they had to drink during the evening. So what did we find? A surprising number of pledges were signed. This was high compared with similar interventions we had reviewed. In the bars that followed the protocols, we saw a 50% drop in drink driving between the control and the test week. And a majority of people said that it had made them think about changing their behaviour and that it was easier not to drink alcohol if driving. We concluded from this that the approach had potential. On the basis of the proof of concept pilot, we ran the same experiment in Russia, Brazil, New Zealand and Vietnam. Each country was allowed to make some minor modifications to suit the local culture. For example, in Brazil, the pledges were put up on the wall in the bar, which had the effect of encouraging even more people to join in and take the pledge. The overall approach, however, was the same, and we got similar results. Heineken now believe that this approach is widely applicable, and we are currently working out how to do this at scale. If you are interested in finding out what the experiment looked like in practice, please click on the link on this slide and see how it worked in a real bar. So what did we learn? The process from initial analysis to getting results from the first experiment was 7 months. In reality, this was very rapid, though our clients sometimes felt it was taking rather a long time. Iteration was critical. It was important to test and retest to get the right interventions. In fact, once we had identified what barriers we needed to overcome, the process could go quickly. It took time to understand what could work, but it was worth it because in the end it helped to reduce uncertainty, reduce costs, and increase the likelihood of success. Don't believe anyone who tells you it's simple. Behaviour change in real-world situations is hard. During the pilot, we had all sorts of issues to contend with unexpectedly. For example, location turned up to film in one of the bars during the experiment, and there was a royal wedding between the decoy and the test week, and we couldn't move the dates of the pilot. A key point is that complex behaviour change may need more than a nudge, and you will need to design approaches that can work across multiple domains. What this case demonstrates is that you can take theory and make it work in practice, and moreover, it can meet the demanding pace of the business world. There are many more things I could tell you about this case. I hope you found it interesting, and if you want to know more, then please contact me at Innovia Technology. Thank you for your time.